I'm here today with Jeaninne Stokes. Jeaninne answered the call in 2009 to pursue a writing ministry. She writes inspirational poetry, devotionals, and articles on hot topics from a biblical perspective, with the goal of inspiring and equipping her readers to grow in their walk with God. She's the author of 5 books, including Living by Faith, a collection of inspirational poetry, and Lessons from the Writing Wilderness, How I Survived the Journey to Become a Christian Author, and how you can too. So Jeaninne, it's wonderful to have you join us here today.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity to interview with you today.
Sure. So maybe we can start off, you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of what led you to where we are today.
I sure will. Well, I was working full-time in higher ed. Went to graduate school, got my master's in higher education, and then started working in higher ed for a number of years in the student services arena. And in 2002, I was just gotten recently promoted, but then I kept hearing the Lord, telling me it was time to go. And I was like, well, what do you mean it's time to go? I just got promoted and I'm enjoying my job. I loved everything about it, but I kept that voice wouldn't go away. And so I said, well, I'm going to just ignore it. And so for about a year I did. I ignored it. And, maybe I just thought I heard God. And this is kind of part of my book, too. I share this story. But it came back to me one morning when I was coming to work, went into my office, turned on my computer, and this quote scrolled across my screen that came out of nowhere. And it said, never be afraid to give up the good, to go for the great. And I just looked and said, okay, you're speaking again. And this time, I think I'm going to obey. And so, long story short, I went through the process of discussing what I felt at that time was the call to step away from my job, talk to my husband about it. And, he gave me the green light to step away. And so I decided to answer the call by leaving my career and beginning the journey to become a professional Christian writer. And so that's my background. That kind of leads up to how I ended up writing Lessons from the Writing Wilderness. I don't know if you want me to go into that now or if you're going to.
Sure. I mean, that's quite a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Most people don't jump quite that directly. A lot of times they kind of ease their way into it, but you decided just to do a cold turkey.
Well, I ended up going part-time.
Okay. Oh, good.
So it wasn't completely, cold turkey because we had to figure out, still how to survive.
Sure. Yeah.
So
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I ended up going part-time with my company and worked part-time for 13 years after working full-time there for about 10 years. So yeah.
There's so few writers that can make a living, just by writing.
Right. And those are, again, the reason why I wrote the book Lessons from the Writing Wilderness, is those are things I didn't know at the time. That, I've learned now, don't quit your day job. But I keep saying I'm going to do a workshop that says, but I already have, And so what do you do if you've already quit your day job and you're trying to, become a professional writer? That's where I am. That's the story that I can talk to people about, because most writers, as you say, they don't quit their day jobs. But the Lord called me to do just that. And that makes my story unique because I stepped away from a lucrative job and took the step of faith to pursue my calling. And so I think that in of itself is my uniqueness that I can share with other aspiring Christian writers who may be feeling called to step away, but are afraid to. And I can share my story. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book.
Yeah, so why don't you talk about your first book? What was that like?
Well, my first book was a book of poetry. Over the years, I had been writing as a hobby. Excuse me for that pop up. I had been writing as a hobby. And so I've always enjoyed writing, but it was something I did on the side. So all the poetry that I had written through the years I took that and turned it into my first book, which was called Living by Faith, a collection of inspirational poetry. And I didn't put a copy in front of me because I was thinking I was just going to be talking about one book. But that was my very first one. I ended up publishing that. I stepped away from work in 2002, and I published that book, I believe, in 2008. My memory is correct. So, during that process of before I got to that point, I was preparing myself on how to publish. I had poetry, but it wasn't publishable in the sense that, I felt like it was ready to be put out there. So I took some time and just kind of learned the craft and honed my gift, if you will, my talent. And then I finally decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this first book out. And it was my first book of poetry that I published in 2008. So that's the very first one that came off the top of the book.
So, self-publishing technology and platforms have changed quite a bit since 2008. How did you self-publish it at that point?
I used a small local publisher who lived in my city. I had gone to a poetry event and asked the poet afterwards, who published your book? And he gave me the name of his publisher. And so I contacted her and said, hey, I'm a poet. I'd like to know if what your rates are to publish my book. She was a small publisher. And she said she took on the project. And so it wasn't a self-published book at that time. It was through a local publisher, small publisher. She's no longer in business now, but she helped me get my very first book out.
Okay.
And of course, at that time, you had to commit to X number of copies. So I had to commit to about 500 copies. So, but it turns out that I ended up selling them all because I had my first book signing at my church, which is a large church, about 3,000 members, and I was able to sell the majority of my books. So that was the good news.
That's great.
Most times, those books end up sitting in your garage, but fortunately, I was able to sell them all.
Wonderful, very good. Yeah. So where did you go from there?
Well, from there, I continued to hone my craft, and spent a lot of time while home. I was working part-time, but that other time that I was here was really my time of preparation. And so I was going to conferences, reading a lot of books on writing, just studying the craft and learning the industry. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then when I felt I was ready to publish my next book, I came up with, actually it was a compilation, if I'm saying that correctly, compilation of quotes because my pastor ended up dying from cancer. And I wanted to compile all of the quotes that I had heard him say through the years so that we would have something to leave as a legacy of his. So I felt compelled to publish a book, and his last name was Bailey, and so the book was called Dailyism, Inspirational Quotes for Life and Faith. So I ended up publishing that small book. That was my second book, and got his wife's permission to publish it. And that one was my first self-published book. I used, at the time, Create Space. And so I ended up publishing that one and worked with his wife to get that book out. She has a ministry, so she used it as she went around speaking and selling copies. And then, of course, I sold a lot of copies through my church, and still on my website, through Amazon, I sell copies. So that was my second one. I was very proud of myself for being able to get that out. Spent a lot of time gathering the quotes along with the ones I had, doing research from members and gathering quotes and listening to sermons. And so I was very glad that I did that for him and for his family. And so that was my second book, called Dailyism. And if you give me a second, do you want me to show you those as we're talking?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. This is my first book, Brian. Can you see that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so that's my very first one, which is a collection of inspirational poetry. And that was again published by a local publisher here in my city. And then my second book was called Dailyism. And that again was the collection of quotes. And it wasn't all of his quotes. He had many, but it was quite a few of them that I was able to compile and leave this legacy for his family. So those are the first two. And so do you want me to talk about the next one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, because of my journey, I had been writing all along the lessons that I was learning along the way. And so because I had so many at a certain point in my journey, I felt like, okay, maybe it's time to write a devotional on my journey for writers. Because again, my whole passion as a Christian writer is to be able to share my story with other aspiring Christian writers. So I took all the things that I had learned so far and came up with my first volume of devotions about my journey called Lessons from the Wilderness, a devotional for aspiring writers beginning the journey to write for publication. So this is volume one, if you will, of my journey that I put down in devotional format to share with other aspiring writers who are beginning their journey. And so this is my third book. And again, it was self-published via Great Space at the time, which is now Kindle Direct. So there you have it. And it's my story again. I'm sharing the journey. And what I do with this book and the book I'm going to share later is I take the story of Moses and the Israelites' journey when Moses, of course, was called to go back to Egypt and deliver the Israelites from Egypt. And so I take my story of how God called me out of my Egypt, if you will, and I had to go into the wilderness, which was my time of preparation, and I talk about my journey in each of my devotions that I had to go through to get to my promised land, which is to become a Christian author. So that's what this first one is all about. And it's not in print anymore because volume 2 has come out. But it's what book is that? Number 3?
Yes.
Number 3. Do you have any questions before I go on?
No, keep going. I mean, this is great, for
Okay.
folks to be able to get an interview or an overview of all the different books that you've written.
And then I may have mentioned earlier that I'm also a poet. I'm a devotional writer and I'm also a poet. And I started out writing poetry when I was in high school. And ever since high school, I have written inspirational poetry. My goal has always been to be like Helen Steiner Rice. You're probably familiar with her. I love her poetry. She's always ministered to me. And I've always wanted to be, the type of poet that she was. And so at one point, I don't remember what year it was, but there was a big surge regarding coloring books. You remember that? Everybody was putting out coloring books. And
Yeah.
so I didn't want to, not be on that bandwagon. So my next book I decided to publish was a coloring book. And I found a artist, a really wonderful artist, and asked her to do the artwork for the book. And then I gave her the poetry that I wanted for the book, and we came up with this book called Living by Faith, an adult coloring book of inspirational poetry. So I take about 18 of my poems and using her artwork, created this book to inspire people who love to color. So this has been a really popular book too. So that's book number 5, 4. I can't keep up, Brian. Now, the next book is, I'm trying to decide which one I want to talk about. This is the next book that I published called Lessons from the Writing Wilderness. Now, I took the first Lessons from the Writing Wilderness, or Lessons from the Wilderness, I took that book and I enhanced it. I felt like it needed some work, and so I went ahead and enhanced it, changed the title to meet the needs more of aspiring Christian writers, and I changed the subtitle. So now it's called Lessons from the Writing Wilderness, How I Survived the Journey to Become a Christian Author and How You Can Too. And it includes a section in the back of each chapter for questions, for group and individual discussion. So it's my memoir, if you will, that tells my story, but it's also a how-to for aspiring Christian writers as they begin to tell their story. So this is volume 2 of that book I mentioned to you.
Very cool.
And then lastly, I just self-published a book of devotions called Powerful Living, 31 Devotions for the Journey of Life and Faith. So this is the latest book that I have out, and all of these I'm using self-publishing now. I've thought about traditional publishing, but one of the benefits for me is self-publishing seems to work. Seems to allow me to get my books out quickly, and it's been good for me. So I recommend it for other aspiring Christian writers, but you do need to understand, of course, the pros and cons of both. So, but I've been self-publishing since the lady went out of business, and that's been working for me. So this is the last book that's on the chopping block for me, called Powerful Living, 31 Devotions for the Journey of Life and Faith. All of these are available at Amazon.com. This one here is available in retail format at Amazon, but it's also available in wholesale format at IngramSpark.com. So for those who want to purchase it in bulk, particularly for writing conferences, for workshops, I'd love for you to order this book. I think that's it, Brian. I also have helped other, I'm a writing coach, so I also have helped other aspiring Christian writers publish their book. And so I wanted to show you that this is one author who, his mother passed, but she had written a manuscript, and he wanted someone who could help him take that manuscript and create a book as a legacy for her. And so I helped him out and helped him come up with this book called Reflections on Love and Discipline, a handbook for parenting godly children. So not only do I write my own books, but I also help other Christian writers write theirs. I wanted to share that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's quite a collection of books.
Yes.
So I'm really curious, how you've seen the Amazon technology change from when you first published to today. How's that gone?
Well, I think it's gotten better for me. The CreateSpace and Kindle Direct are not that much different to me, but I do feel like they've made some minor changes to make it a little easier to publish. And, particularly with the numbers, and I'm not a numbers person, but I like what they've done to help me be able to look at my numbers better than I was able to before.
Sales numbers.
Yeah, my sales numbers, and it's easier for me. They have graphic charts, and so they've made that much easier to look at. But I don't see any major differences really between CreateSpace and Kindle Direct that have gotten in the way of me publishing my books. I love the fact that, I'm using now their cover creators when I wasn't before. Like this book here was a KDP cover. So I'm using them more. All the other covers were done through someone else. So I am taking more advantage of that resource, their cover creator resource. So, and I noticed that, they don't look too bad, the covers that they're offering. So I like that.
So one of the things that I've seen with, books that are published through Amazon is that the print quality is very good. Have you seen that to be the case and consistently the case?
Yes, I've seen the print quality to be very good. Now, I also had the same book, Ingram Spark. One of these is from Ingram Spark, and one of these is from Amazon. Do you see the difference?
The one looks a little bit lighter than the other one.
Right. Ingram Sparks' book is, I thought, much better in terms of the print quality than Amazon's was. So it was just sharper and just crisper to me in terms of the Ingram Sparks. But their cost, of course, is a little higher too. So, but no, I haven't had any issues with Amazon's print quality at all. I've been very pleased.
So the one that you did through Ingram, you uploaded it separately to the Ingram Spark interface?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yes. They offer, the same resource that Amazon offers in terms of being able to publish your book. You can do it through Ingram Spark. You don't even have to use Amazon.
So I thought that Amazon had an option in their distribution, of the books that you create through KDP that would allow the book to go to Ingram Spark, or to Ingram at least. Does that work or not?
I think they do. I think I wanted to try Ingram Spark because I understood that they would provide a more expanded distribution than what I was getting from Amazon.
Okay.
So I wanted to try them to see if I would get more exposure, more sales by using them and because if I use Ingram Spark for a particular book, I can't use Amazon for expanded distribution, from what I understood. So I chose for, I believe, lessons to use Amazon for certain things and to use Ingram Spark because I wanted people to be able to also buy wholesale. For example, let's say, your conference, you wanted to get 20 books from me, or let's say 200 books. Well, the best way to do that is through Ingram Spark versus through Amazon.
Okay.
So that's why I wanted to use them. I haven't really found success yet by using them, and so I don't know if I'll continue to use them, but I'm glad I, tried, gave it an opportunity. But no, you're right. If I just use Amazon and I click on expanded distribution, then I believe that includes Ingram.
Okay.
I believe it does.
That's what I thought, but I mean, I wasn't sure about it, so.
Yeah, and I have to go back again. This is my first experience with Ingram, so I don't know all the nuances behind it. But when I put the book out there, I did get a quick response from UK, United Kingdom, and then, of course, from someone here in the U.S. But I haven't since then received any sales.
Okay.
But
Well,
I do like the cover. Okay, yeah,
good,
I do like the cover.
Well, it's really good to learn about, your journey. Everyone that I talk to from an author perspective has got a different story of how they got started and which paths they've taken and whatever. So it's really good to hear yours. And also, that you've been able to do so much with the self-publishing route. Yeah,
it's really been, for me, just, I like the quick turnaround. And, and I like the fact that I can receive all of my, profits. So, and I'm pretty good at being able to upload and do all the things that are required. So it's worked for me. I do still want with a traditional publisher. I would like that as part of my resume. But as of right now, self-publishing seems to work.
Good. Well, again, that's really good to hear that and to hear your story about it.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Jeaninne, for joining us and sharing your work with us. And good luck with where it goes from here.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I look forward to continuing to write for the Kingdom. And, I hope that there's something that I said today that inspires others to do the same. Thank you again.
Thank you.